So, first an acknowledgement. This talk is based on current and extensive work with Dan Chiappi, he's a professor at the University of California, about the phenomenology of rover fieldwork on Mars. I have a lot there. So this is what I want to do today. I want to talk to you about what do the rovers have to do with vision. These are the rovers that are on Mars, Spirit, and Opportunity. This is how we're getting a lot of our information about Mars. This is where we're doing a lot of the field work of geology on Mars, trying to determine if there's been water on Mars, etc. And I think why this is interesting for us is it's an exemplary case of what's called 4E cognitive science. The 4E themes of the idea that cognition is extended, it's not just in the head, it's embodied, the body plays a crucial role, it's embedded, it's deeply coupled to its environment, and it's enacted. It's through the sensory motor loop that cognition actually exists. And what I want to show you is I think the rover is a really interesting test case for applying 4E to vision, especially vision into cognition. The main problem I want to address is how the scientists with only limited visual information, we'll talk about what that is shortly, develop a sense of being on Mars. And what does that exactly mean? How can remote time delayed vision create a sense of presence? We'll then talk about the two senses of presence and the transformation from verisimilitude presence to epistemic working presence to dynamic identification. I'll go through what all of that means, of course. If you totally understood what I was saying, there'd be no point to the talk. This case study shows how the propositional theoretical knowing of Mars depends on procedural fieldwork skills, which depend on perspectival abilities to restructure salient landscaping and sizing up. And then I want to finally argue, this is the part that I find so provocatively intriguing. This perspectival knowing of what it's like to be and work on Mars depends on a participatory knowing of and through the rover. Seeing as, the famous Wittgensteinian phrase, on Mars depends on seeing as the rover. Okay, so what does all this mean? Okay, so the NASA scientists were allowing robotic rovers on Mars in order to do most of the scientific investigation of Mars. Of course, there is some supplement from orbital satellites. Most of it is field work on Mars. It's interesting because they're not actually there, but that's how they refer to it often, doing field work on Mars, in which the geology of Mars plays a crucial role. The strategy has been to follow the water, look for evidence of water on Mars as a precursor to looking for evidence of life on Mars. Okay. So, this is the important stuff about how this interaction happens. The rovers send back batch still photos. They send back a whole bunch of still photos all at once. And they're significantly time delayed, of course, because of the distance of Mars from Earth. So it's important to understand that there's no joystick control of the rovers. Okay, you can't joystick control the rovers. The temporal spatial delay is too great. Okay, they originally thought they were trying to be able to manage that, and it's just not workable. Okay? Yet it is the scientists on Earth, of course, who are using the visual information and the ability to move the rovers to do all the science on Mars. So the rover AI is inadequate to doing the science. Okay? So although there's no joystick control, the scientists are still doing the science through the rovers. The AI basically helps the rover navigate, avoid obstacles, but it doesn't in any way, do the science. So this seems like a clear case for examining extended cognition. It seems like there's some combination of humans on Mars and it's extended in time and space that's actually doing, right? There's humans on there's humans on Earth, there's the rovers on Mars, it's extended in time and space, and somehow together they're doing the science. That looks pretty much like extended cognition, which is an important 4E theme. Yet it seems to challenge another theme, enactment, since the sensory motor loop is so delayed and its connection to action is so displaced. There is no joystick control. So there is any kind of tight sensory motor loop. It also throws a wrench into the embodiment, since the robot body is not a human body, nor is it in the same environment as the human being, so both embodiment and embeddedness are problematized in significant ways. However, and this is where it gets, I think, really interesting, for all of this problematization, the scientists regularly and reliably report two important phenomenological features. They report a sense of being on Mars. I'm on Mars. I'm like the sense that I have right now that I'm in this room. They're reliable. They report a sense of presence. And they report that this sense of presence is bound up with seeing as the rover. We're going to talk about what that means. So this ability to be on Mars and see as the rover is actually highly prized by the scientific community, because they specifically select for individuals who show the ability to pick this up. And they don't quite know how to teach it either. They sort of tutor and apprentice people, and some people get it, and some people don't, and the people that get it get sort of hired and taken into the community. The people that don't are given the parting gift prize. Now, fieldwork is used, that term is used, as I said, to designate the combination of exploration and explanation generated through the rovers, and it's deeply analogous. The scientists consider it deeply analogous to human geologists doing fieldwork on Earth. So here's the problem. Given how disruptive standard forwarding features are, how is it that the scientists nevertheless seem to acquire the phenomenological markers of embeddedness and action, and as we shall see, embodied? How do they get that sense of being on Mars and seeing as the rover? Okay? That's the central question I want to try and address in this talk. Now, there's more extended work with Dan Chiappi, and we'll pick up on the implications of this argument for understanding the vision, especially for the phenomena of vision into presence, how does vision generate a sense of presence? We'll also explore what this might imply about extended cognition, but right now I just want to center in on this one question that I posed for you. Okay, so there's a lot of work on sense of presence since the rise of virtual games and environments. So VR has really led a lot of people to ask, well, how do you get this sense of presence? Because having a game generate a sense of presence is how they sought after a feature. People want it, they look for it, they try to figure out what are the features of a game, for example, that will make people reliably report that they have a sense of presence. Now, I'm not attempting here to summarize that work, because it's actually quite large to work on presence, and so I will not be offering an exhaustive definition of presence. That's not my goal here. Instead, I will try to point to some key features that will be necessary for this talk. So, the sense of presence is the sense of being there. It's an active, indexical sense of here-nowness in some environment. I'm here now in this room. Right? And this is why it's often expressed as being in, like I'm in this room right here, right now, or being on Mars, for example. Now, one important consequence of a sense of presence is an attendant sense of realness. So in the VR research, when people get a sense of presence, they will often say, it felt so real. Right? It felt so real. So presence makes the experience real, where I'm using this term to report a sense rather than making an ontological reference to reality. I will use realness, that word, to refer to this phenomenological feature in contrast to reality for an ontological claim. Is that understood? Okay? Thank you. This sense of realness is normative for us, in the sense that we seek it as good, we experience it as good, we intuitively understand why someone would seek it. If someone says, I want to experience realness in a game, you don't go, why? Why would you want that? You go, oh yeah, right, I want that too. All right? We experience that as rewarding. Oh, that was great, it felt so real, yum, 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 yum. Right? Such that it is plausible that it's an evolutionary marker that guides behavior. It seems that it's doing some important cognitive work for us. So two questions immediately arise. What is it about presence that generates realness? And why does it have this normative value for us? And you can see that normative value in the field work on Mars, because the scientists look for people who can generate this sense of presence, this sense of realness. Okay, so what's going on here? And how is it working when it's so far away and displaced in time? So one intuition that a lot of people have is that the sense of presence is generated by verisimilitude. Right? The more the game looks like the real world, the more the sense of presence I'll get. And I mean, this is a plausible intuition, because that, verisimilitude will help to explain, presumably, both presence, a sense of presence, and a sense of realness together. So it is an intuitively plausible claim. And one of the things that science is good at is undermining intuitively plausible claims. That's a good way to get a job as a scientist. And that's what quite a bit of the research into VR has shown. It's shown that you can have verisimilitude without a sense of presence, and that one can have a sense of presence in games such as Tetris that have very low degrees of verisimilitude. So, although it seems, yeah, that must be the answer, it seems neither necessary nor sufficient. This last feature that I point to also strongly suggests that the sense of presence precedes in causation, but not in our normal phenomenology. It precedes the sense of realness. Okay, so could I take questions at the end, please? Thank you. So the role of Tetris points to the role of intense involvement in generating a sense of presence. So when you look at that case, what many people say, well, although there is a verisimilitude, there's this tremendous sense of involvement, and that's somehow related to the sense of presence. So a former student of mine, Gary Avanassian, and others in 2019, just last year, drew upon this lack of verisimilitude and this sense of involvement, and previous work that I have done with Leo Ferraro and Marion to argue that the ability to generate the flow experience, that chick sat behind me, famous in 1990, is actually what creates the sense of presence. It's that people get into the flow state, and then the flow state is what's generating the sense of presence. And that, of course, accounts for a lot of the data very well, because we know that one of the things that video games reliably do is induce the flow state. So that's, again, very plausible. And some features of the flow state may explain the sense of realness. So these are the features that Csikszentmihalyi talks about. You have an intense and focused concentration on the present moment. That might sort of enhance a sense of presence. That makes sense. A merging of action, of awareness, a sense of at one-ment. You're deeply at one with the environment. Well, if you're real and you're at one with the environment's going to be real, right? There's a loss of self-consciousness. That doesn't mean a loss of consciousness. It means that sort of narrating sort of naming ego in your head. How am I doing? Do they like me right now? How's my hair? Is anybody noticing that I skipped a term there, etc.? Although you know you're exerting a lot of effort, there's a sense of effortlessness or grace. Your experience of time is altered, and that may help to compensate, for example, with the time delay. You experience the activity as intrinsically rewarding, the sense of realness and presence are intrinsically rewarding. It's super salient. There's a sense of significant discovery. It's like the world is shining to you. That could also induce a sense of presence and realness. Because when we have this experience of insight, we tend to regard what we have an insight about as more real, right? And flow is an optimal experience in two ways. It's very rewarding and it's very effective. We feel like we're really coupled very strongly to the environment. So this all is, I think, it's a very good argument. And I got to meet with Gary and talk to him about it. The problem for me and for Dan, this is the flow channel. So you always, what you need is the demands of the situation are just met by your skills. And again, doing this work on Mars is very demanding, and you have to use all their skills. So all of this, what I said, is very plausible, but as I said, there's some challenges about this. So, first of all, this is a prototypical thing for generating the flow state. This is rock climbing. Generating the flow state is the only explanation I can come up with why people do this absurd thing. This is a torture from Greek mythology. You go up this. You will hurt yourself, you'll cut yourself, it'll be tremendously effortful, you might fall and hurt yourself, and once you get to the top, come back down. So, and we've done research on it, so people do rock climb precisely because it engenders the flow state. So you can see why, I'm putting that up so you get an intuitive sense of why flow would get you so engaged and involved and connected, and the environment would become so present to you. So this all seems very good, but as I alluded to already, when I was talking to Gary, Dan and I had sort of some issues with this. Because for all this promise, flow brings back the problems we're addressing. Csikszentmihalyi argues that in order to trigger the flow state, the interaction with the environment has to have three essential features. There has to be clear feedback of information. There has to be a tight coupling between actions and the results of actions. There can't be a delay, a significant delay. And error is diagnostic. Failure disrupts performance in an obvious and powerful way. That's why rock climbing is. So notice how rock climbing has all those features. You've got to clearly know what's going on, right? Or like, whoa, like your actions and how the environments respond are tightly coupled together because you have to make fine-tuned, rapid decisions. And error is completely diagnostic. If you make a mistake, it's very costly. But think about that. While error with the robots is no doubt critical because it could lead to the demise of the robot, we should know that the visual pictures that come back from Mars are not clear. They are inherently ambiguous. They are literally subject to hours of debate. Literally. But when you finally see something, that's gone through tremendous processing, tremendous debate and discussion. So the feedback is not clear. And as I've already mentioned, there is no way this can be done. There's no way this can be done. Now, I think that maybe within the flow phenomena, there's a more basic phenomena that might be relevant to the sense of presence and the sense of realness by the rovers. I want to pun a little on the previous picture about something presupposed by flow. Okay, so here's our rock climber again, and I want to pun on this idea developed by Merleau-Ponty about optimal grip. Because one of the things this guy needs is optimal grip. Okay, now he needs it literally. Merleau-Ponty is talking about it in a metaphorical sense. And what Ponty means by that is, right, and this idea has been more recently developed by Dreyfus and Taylor in philosophy, by Brunenberg and Rettveld in psychology. And I'm also going to make use of some related and relevant ideas from what's called prospect and refuge theory. So what's the basic idea of optimal grip, right? So what Ponty argued, and these other people have developed, is the idea that in vision, we're trying to get a trade-off between variables, and we're trying to get sort of the best trade-off between variables that will optimize our interaction with the object in the situation. So one is between gestalt and features. Okay, so I try to get to a place where I can get the best relation from between the overall gestalt and the individual details of the chair. So, this is generally not very good, right? Too far back. So it's also when I try to look at somebody, I try to zoom to the place where I get sort of the most. So this is good for Jim, but not so good, right? Things like that, and not so good because of occlusion. So you're actually moving around to try and get this best trade-off between gestalt and feature. Is that okay? That's one trade-off. That was one of the ones that Merleau-Ponty emphasized. Mason also talked in 1976 in his book on sentience between other trade-offs. There's a trade-off, of course, between foregrounding and backgrounding. What are you foregrounding and backgrounding? And you're constantly sort of shifting that around to try and get an optimal relation for your interaction. You're also moving around, right, to try and get the best trade-off between what's familiar and what's novel to you. Too much novelty, you can't categorize it. Too much familiarity, you might miss some opportunities or what's needed in the situation. That's not an exhaustive list. Do you understand that? I'm just trying to give you a flavor for what optimal grip is doing. Now, I ultimately think that this rounds out in relevance realization, but I'm not going to talk about relevance realization because I promised myself I would. Another trade-off emphasized by prospect and refuge theory is that between seeing and being seen. So one of the things that prospect and refuge theory is also, it has an unfortunate nickname. It's called a womb with a view. A womb with a view. Because the idea is because we evolved in the context in which we were seeking food and seeking to not be food, what we want to get a place where we can see as much as possible while being as hidden as possible. And those are in a trade-off relationship. Because if you get too hidden, it includes your vision, and you open up too much to see too much, then you're easily visible. And so we're constantly trying to get the trade-off. So we're doing all of this in vision to try and get an optimal grip. So, let's try to put it together. Optimal grip, we're trying to get a good view, gestalt, featural, foreground, background, familiarity, novelty, while engaging in a good viewing, prospect, refuge, and also we're trying to play between exploiting our situation and exploring other situations. And both of these dimensions are dynamically complex and are constraining each other all the time. This was Merleau-Ponty's idea as developed by Dreyfus and Taylor and Brunenberg and Rettveld, etc. I would also argue that Polanyi's distinction between focal and subsidiary or tacit awareness is helpful here. In optimal grip, one has a focally good view. This is sort of more adjectival, while one has a tacit awareness of and through a good viewing, which is more advertive. So I'm sort of tacitly aware that I'm moving in the right way, I'm getting good viewing, I'm doing prospect and refuge, explore and exploit, and then I'm focally aware that I'm getting a balance between gestalt and featural, etc. So all of this gives us seeing as. When I do all of that, I start to see this as something. Now, that's not full-blown categorization, but it's different from just it being an indistinct blob in my object. I see it as something with which I can effectively interact. I call that the aspectuality, to pick on Wittgenstein's idea of seeing aspects. Right? But of course, this generation of aspectuality, this seeing as, is unfolding through time. There's a temporality to it, and Suzanne's going to talk about that later, in a way which is really centered upon us as actors. So there's an aspectuality to it, all that stuff I just talked about with optimal gripping, that's unfolding through time, and it's centered on us as actors, because it's ultimately grounded in affording our interaction. Okay. By the way, that gives you the acronym ACT, aspectuality, centrality, and temporality. That's my way of punning on enactment. Okay. What we get out of this multi-dimensional and complex optimal grip sizing up through time, centered on us, is a constantly shifting salience landscape. How things are standing out to us. So things are foregrounding, backgrounding, right? When I get that sort of optimal grip, they start to pop out to me in certain ways. So I'm getting this dynamically shifting salience landscape that has aspectuality, temporality, and centrality. I call that salience landscape. I want to call this optimal grip sizing up salience landscaping perspectival knowing. This is what it's like to be here now. Right? Through, both sense of the word, through and by means of, this is what it's like to be here now through one's current state of mind. But of course, I mean, the state of mind is enacted in the way I've been trying to explain. My claim is that sense of presence is the phenomenological feel of perspectival knowing. That when perspectival knowing is going, the what it's likeness of perspectival knowing, right, is the sense of presence. So how do the scientists generate perspectival knowing through the rovers while dealing with displacement and delay? Okay, so Vervaeke, in her book in 2015, she did the ethnography of the scientists working with the rover. One of the people that did the ethnography. Talks about a complex process she calls drawing as. She explicitly links it to Wittgenstein's notion of seeing as. The idea is the scientists are altering the image, and that's one sense of drawing. They're doing stuff to it, manipulating the image, maybe drawing on it. But she wants to play on that word. They're also drawing out what needs to be seen. So drawing as means drawing, but drawing out what needs to be seen as a way of affording seeing as. So they're specifically doing all this manipulation so you can see this blob on the photo as a deposit of silica. Okay. So, as I said, they do lots of things. They take the raw photos and they process them in order to be able to generate seeing as spectrality. They meet continuously, creating a shared narrative of the movement of the rover. So they've got this sort of narrative constantly running, and they mark it on the photos. This is where we were, this is how we've come. Right? And they're always keeping in mind and talking about the mechanical limits of the rover. Everything is centered on the energetic, economic limits of the rover. Everything that has ultimate authority over all decisions that are made. Right? For example, you have to often forego doing scientific exploration because you have to use the resources of the rover to get it to a place where it can sleep and get enough sunlight when it wakes up, that's how they talk about it, so that you'll be able to use the rover the next day. So there's two kinds of processings that are designed to create two kinds of presence for the scientist. The first alters the photos. All the photos are always being altered. Okay? This first way alters color, lighting, stability of background features, points of view of the picture, and integrates several pictures together to create something that is seen as verisimilitude presence. What Mars would look like to me if I were on Mars. Here the scientists seek out and seek to convey a sense of awe and beauty for themselves as motivational, but also especially for the public for support and funding. They explicitly look for vast vistas that nevertheless convey a sense of journey and of tranquility or serenity. So they're doing prospect refuge all the time for this. They're trying to, where can we place it so people, they use this term, so people will feel awe and feel tranquil and peaceful. Right? They even look for vistas that convey an American sense of a frontier being explored and explained. This is how they try to get familiarity and novel and explore and exploit balanced nicely. They heed sort of cultural icons of the frontier for Americans. They do this deliberately. So, this is an example. I want to show you 2 stages. I can't show you all the processing, but see how what they've done is they've knitted a bunch of things together, and then they've done all of this stuff, and then they've done an algorithm that resituates the point of view from the rover to where a human being would do. They've balanced the background of the sky. Pictures were taken at different time, and the sky changes. Like all this is happening. And then they release it to the public like that. And this creates a tremendous sense of presence. Right? In one sense, oh, that's what it would be like to be on Mars. But it's actually a weak sense of presence in another way. Because the scientists don't really value those pictures. Because they don't afford working on Mars at all. That verisimilitude sense of presence, like in the video games, doesn't improve working on Mars. Because those pictures, on that first kind of presence, is what it would be like to be a human, an American even, on Mars. But what is needed is what it would be like to be a rover on Mars. Because you have to use the rover. The needed seeing is not seeing as a human, but seeing as a rover. So I'm playing on seeing as, not only seeing something as something, but seeing it as beings, like you are a particular kind of agent. It's not just the seeing as of the view, but also the seeing as of the viewing and the viewer. That's why, that's the title of her book, Seeing Like a Rover. Seeing like a rover, seeing as a rover. The second sense of presence is the one that's highly sought after. And as the title of her book indicates, she was really interested in how this second sense of presence is created. And what she notes is there's a reciprocal process of identification that helps to develop that sense that was generated through a set of practices. She noticed that the robots are anthropomorphized, but in a very particular way. The scientists regularly say things, I need to go there, meaning the rover needs to move to a location. Right? They talk about moving the cameras as moving the eyes. They manipulate the arms, and the tools on the arms are referred to as fingers. The rover sweeps, it wakes up, it looks at its targets, and it talks to the Earth. Right? But there's more than anthropomorphism at work. For Tessie talks about how the scientists do the reverse. She coins this term, they technomorphize themselves. Right? The scientists will try to actually enact this technomorphic identity. So here's a drawing of one of the scientists doing this. Right? Here's a rock, she puts her phone down, and she sits on a moving chair. She goes, here's my camera, and I need to do this. She enacts it. She turns herself into something like the robot. So there's this loop. The human beings are anthropomorphizing the rover, but they're also Actually, I started 5 minutes later than this, so I should get another 5 minutes. I can keep talking my watch. Okay? So they anthropomorphize the rover, but they technomorphize themselves. It's very powerful. So there's an enacted integration of knowing oneself through the rover, knowing the rover through oneself, so that one is simultaneously knowing oneself, knowing the rover, and knowing through the rover. It's this really complex process, and they're doing it all intuitively. They don't sort of know that, they don't sort of let's do this explicitly. There's a dynamic mutual shaping that is analogous to how organisms and environments dynamically mutually shape each other in niche construction, or how culture also mutually shapes people and environment. Niche construction makes us sort of biologically at home in the environment. Culture layers on that in a technological and symbolic way. So we're even more at home. Think of how you're at home here right now. And that's contributing very significantly to your sense of presence. I like to name this cognitive, visual, and active mutual shaping into being at home, but it sounds like a Heideggerian phrase. So I want to replace it with this idea of participatory knowing. Participatory knowing. I want to emphasize how deep this participatory knowing goes with a series of quotes from her paper 2012, but there's similar quotes in Vervaeke 2015. The first quote comes from the person enacting the rover a couple of slides ago that I showed you, the person that was being drawn. So that points to her cell phone on the desk, close-up rock, all right? And then I know that there's a disconnect, raises hands to either side of her face, between left and right eyes of the rover. So I have to move my head like this, tilt her head down, rotates at the waist, tilting right hand higher than left. And I have my left eye here, pauses, and then this swivels to the other side, keeping head down with left hand higher than right is my view from my right eye. Do you see that? She then goes on to say, my body, by the way, is always the rover. So right here is the front of the rover, my magnets are right here, touches the base of her neck, my shoulders are the front solar panels, right? So I have all kinds of things, antenna sticking up over here. She laughs, but when I'm taking a picture of something in the atmosphere, that it helps me to kind of look up, being the rover, and this is the front of me, and then I put my head up, wherever, to which vector I'm looking at. Another researcher talks about the shift from two-dimensional to three-dimensional picture changes. It changes salience, it alters the salience landscape in a way that triggers a kinesthetic sense in the scientist, which then is fed back into the picture. There's something to be said for engaging your own kinesthetic sense. If you take a look at this 3D, you can see how it kind of pops out of salience and how this terrain is kind of undulating. Where I could see kind of that there was a ridge here in 2D, this is now giving me a much better sense of the size of that ridge and the slope of that ridge. So going 3D pops something out, it triggers his kinesthetic sense, and then he gets a sense of the depth and the slope in the picture. I'm giving you a variety of quotes from a variety of people. One of the mission managers had this to say. You just have an intuition as to, I don't know, this is a good example or not, but you know as you get older, you understand how your body works more, and so you know the effects of it, and you haven't eaten breakfast or something, and you know by lunchtime you can feel, you know what it's like to feel, you know how you feel differently right before lunch, as opposed to yesterday when you had breakfast. And so operating the vehicles, after a while, you get an idea of, well, okay, the rover did this yesterday, so I have a feeling, I know what it's going to be like tomorrow, I know it did a really long drive yesterday, so I have a feeling. Another scientist had this to say. I was working in the garden one day, and all of a sudden, I don't know what's going on with my right wrist. I can't move it, out of nowhere. I get here to the planning meeting, and Spirit, one of the rovers, has its right front wheel to start. Things like that, you know? I am totally connected to Spirit. Another scientist, that's kind of creepy, right? Another scientist said something similar. Interestingly, I screwed up my shoulder and needed surgery on it right about that time. Opportunities IDD arm started having problems, like with a stiff shoulder, and I broke my right toe before Spirit's wheel broke. So I'm just saying, maybe it's kind of sympathetic. I don't know, ha 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 ha. I mean, I don't think there's any magic involved or anything, but maybe it's some kind of subconscious thing. I don't know. Vervaeke then reports that this body work is certainly intimately associated with visualization practices and interpretive skills. People who do this are the people they want, because they succeed at getting the science out of Mars. So it's important to note that this second kind of processing takes the pictures way away from verisimilitude. They're doing all kinds of manipulations of the picture. They put colors on it, they draw, they put words all over it, because they're trying not to trigger verisimilitude presence, they're trying to trigger this epistemic working presence, sense of presence. I'm proposing to you an order of dependence. The proposition of theoretical knowledge obtained through vision is dependent on procedural knowing, how to use the rover, which is dependent on perspectival knowing, this second sense, the epistemic working sense of presence, and that is dependent on a participatory knowing, being on Mars. The theory depends on skills, which depend on seeing as, which depends on seeing as the rover. This is all done mostly implicitly and tacitly. So we noted, remember we talked about that flow article. Hogarth talks about that in flow, what you need to do is you implicitly set up all the conditions that will distinguish causation from correlation. That's why it's so valued. It's very similar to a scientific experiment. You need the clear information, just be confounding. You need a tight coupling, dependency between X and Y, and falsification matters. So he says the way you improve implicit learning, the way you improve your intuitions, and all this is intuitive for the scientist, right, is that you set up in the flow state an enacted implicit structure that's very similar to scientific experimentation. And that's which actually gives the sense of realness in flow. You're doing a kind of implicit experimentation that helps you distinguish the causal patterns from the correlation patterns. Well, the scientists can't get into flow, but you know what they can do? They don't do implicit science like the rock climber is doing. They do explicit science. They're explicitly working with the rover to distinguish causation from correlation. So in addition to the optimal grip in flow, they're doing what Hogarth said flow is advantageous for. But they're not doing it implicitly, they're doing it explicitly. They're explicitly doing science. And that act of distinguishing causation from correlation is also helping to generate this sense of realness. So think about this. If they can do all that tracking that I just did, the propositional into the procedural, into the perspectival and the participatory, and then they're doing good science and distinguishing the causal patterns from the correlational ones. That's why the sense of presence is also going to be accompanied, I would argue, with a sense of realness. Seeing as depends on seeing as the rover through perspectival and participatory knowing that generates presence and realness in how one does. And that's how you do seeing into being on Mars. Thank you very much.
So we have some time for Q&A. Dr. Vervaeke, thank you so much for your incredible talk. So first, we have some questions.
Yes. Yes.
So, in an earlier slide, you explained that there is a double dissociation between sense of let's see, what was it? Verisimilitude.
Verisimilitude and sense of presence. Yeah.
Anyway, you make this inference that the sense of presence, I am here now, is causally prior to the sense of realness, and I don't really follow that inference. Can you go back to the slide?
Because, for example, in Tetris, people don't initially find it to have any sort of sense of realness because it doesn't look like anything. It's not realistic. But when they get into something like the flow state, they get a sense of presence, and then they say, it's like, I'm really there. They start to evoke realness. That's what I meant.
You were talking about the perspectival knowing.
Perspectival,
yeah. Knowing through our environment, through our senses. Could this phenomenon also be explained by an almost filling in of the blanks of those senses? You're not necessarily experiencing them in the environment you're currently in, but through your imagination you can trigger those same senses or same behaviors.
I think that's a really important question, and I think it's actually pertinent to this case study. And I didn't have time to talk about it with Dan and I working on it. There's obviously an important way in which imagination is being used by the scientists. But it's a weird kind of imagination. It's not mental imagery in your head. It's more like Corbin's sense of the imaginal. It's always interacting. The images are always interactional and enacted in the environment. And it's really important because people who just try to imagine, they don't get the skills that are needed. So I think imagination plays an important role, but I don't think it's so much a capacity to introspect mental images as to do this enactive kind of thing.
Would you almost say it's almost like a helpful form of schizophrenia? In the sense that you're experiencing something that's not there, but you're able to innately trigger this?
No, I'm not sure about that. I mean, because there's so much salience dysregulation going on in schizophrenia. It confounds so many things. I don't know. I wouldn't want to draw that again. I need a lot more argument and evidence to draw that at any point.
So we do get this sense of realness when we are dreaming and sleep without any outside interaction with outside world? How do you think that comes about?
Well, so there's interesting stuff going on there about what that might mean, and there's a lot of weirdness. I mean, you are sort of, you have a surrogate body and a surrogate environment, and you're interacting with it in that way. What's really interesting is actually qualities of interaction seem to really rev up that sense of realness. So this is one of the things that distinguishes a lucid dream, for example, from a regular dream. And what's interesting there, for example, is the fact that things are sort of surprising to you and beyond, so that you have to, so as you ramp up the challenge and the awareness that you're challenged, you get into something, I think, analogous to the flow state, and I think that would help explain what's going on in you. Which is really creepy with lucid dreams, because like when the dream figures come up, you can talk to them and they seem to have perspectives other than the ego dream, and that really ratchets up the sense of realness of the dream. As soon as you've got a sense of other perspectives, then it's cool, right? And people talk about that sort of jarring of the dream.
This is a great talk, first of all, thank you. We talked about people having this sense of presence in video games, and that being a form of implicit science, and rover being a form of explicit science.
Yes.
Do you think there's a qualitative difference between those two?
I mean, I do. I mean, I think I do because of their epistemic potential. I mean, I think one of the reasons why we practice explicit science, rather than just trying to get into flow of everything, is the scope of things about which we can do that kind of distinction between causal and correlational patterns is greatly expanded by explicit science in a way that it's much more localized in flow, precisely because of how tightly bound it is to, sort of immediate scope of the environment.
So what I meant was with respect to the sense of presence, not the epistemic problem.
Well, I argue there was. I think it's pretty clear, and Dan agrees with me on this, that the scientists are not getting into the flow state. So there's a lot of phenomenological difference there. But they are getting this other sense of realness and this sense of presence. And that's why I think the participatory knowing is so important. It's doing a lot of the heavy lifting. It's doing a lot of the heavy lifting.
Okay, thank you so much for all your questions. Thank you again, Dr. Vervaeke. And we'll just take a quick break, and then we'll move on to our next speaker, Dr. John Soto. Thank you.